Creation, the reign of the fathers. Part 2. In the beginning, humanity walked with the divine in a perfect garden. But after eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve were cast out into a harsh world. Their sons brought both triumph and tragedy. Cain became the first murderer, while Seth carried on the righteous line. As humanity multiplied, wickedness grew until only Noah remained faithful. Through the great flood, his family alone survived to rebuild. Yet again, human pride rose in the Tower of Babel, leading God to scatter the nations and confuse their tongues. Then came Abraham, called from the city of Ur to journey to an unknown land. His faith was tested when asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, but God provided a ram instead. Isaac grew to father twin sons, Esau the hunter and Jacob the deceiver. Through deception, Jacob gained his father's blessing and fled from his brother's wrath. Yet in exile, he encountered God and was transformed from a trickster into Israel, the father of a nation. These stories remind us how ordinary people, despite their flaws, can play extraordinary roles in history's greatest narrative. The Tower of Babel, the earth divided. Shem, the son of Noah, begot his first son, Arphaxad, 2 years after exiting the ark. Shem was 100 years old at the time of Arphaxad's birth. Shem lived another 500 years and begot many more sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot his first son, Salah. Arphaxad lived another 403 years and begot many more sons and daughters. Salah lived 30 years and begot Eber. Eber lived 34 years and begot Peleg. It is recorded in Genesis 10:25 that in the days of Peleg the earth was divided. But what does it mean that the earth was divided? Many theologians and scholars over the centuries have interpreted this one verse with much bias, referencing the story of Babel in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Nimrod was born to the third generation from the flood, born to Cush, the son of Ham, the son of Noah. He became a mighty person on the earth, becoming king over all its inhabitants. Under Nimrod's rule, the people went out and built many cities. One was called Babel. It was built on the plains of Shinar. One day, Nimrod went out to the people and commissioned them to construct a tower whose top would reach the heavens. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Now with Peleg being born to the 4th generation after the flood, and living to a good old age of 239, he was one of the many children of Noah who did walk on the earth at the time of Nimrod, when the Lord and the angels came down and confused the language of the people and scattered them across the face of the earth. The sons of Noah packed up their belongings, their wives, children, and livestock, and walked out of the city of Babel and the plains of Shinar. And once the descendants of Noah began to settle in these new lands of Pangaea, this once supercontinent began to separate and divide into the 7 continents of today. Let us look back to Genesis 7:11, where it is recorded that on that day that Noah entered the ark, the foundations of the great deep were broken up. On that day when Noah entered the ark, the Lord literally shook the foundation of the earth, that we call Pangaea, to its very core. Like many of my fellow creationists, I believe that the continents separated at a fairly rapid speed when first divided. I am also theorizing that by the time of Christ Jesus, the continents had slowed to nearly a crawl, and the division of the earth was nearly completed. I read several years ago that the east coast of North America and the western shores of Europe are still drifting apart from one another at a rate of about 6 inches per year. Judging by this slow rate of movement, we can see that the Earth is still not willing to come to a halting rest. The separation of the continents was God's master plan to create diversity on the Earth. From the Incas to the Mayans to the indigenous peoples of South America to the Hopi Indians of North America to the Eskimo and all the peoples throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, and the indigenous people of the continent of Australia, they are all descendants of the sons of Noah. We walk the earth today, speaking in different tongues, with great variations in our skin tones and cultures. Fanatical differences in our religious beliefs and governmental structures exist. Regardless of all this very well-planned diversity, we all descend from one place and from one Father, which makes us all the children of Noah. The birth of Abraham. Peleg was the 4th generation from the flood born to the sons of Shem. Abraham was the 9th generation born to the sons of Shem. He was born to his father, Terah, 292 years after the flood. Abraham would be the 19th generation born to the sons of Adam, about 1,822 years after Adam's exile from the garden. That means Abraham would have been born in the year 4178 BC. Abraham dwelt in the city of Ur, in the lands of the Chaldeans, with his father, Terah, and his 2 brothers, Nahor and Haran. While living amongst the people of Ur, Abraham's brother Haran died, leaving a son named Lot. The time had come for Terah to depart from the city of Ur to go to the land of Canaan. With him he took Abraham, who was called Abram, and his daughter Sarah, who was called Sarai, who he gave to Abram to be his wife. As they journeyed to the land of the Canaanites, they came upon Haran and dwelt there for a time. While dwelling in Haran, Terah succumbed to his old age and died. Terah was 205 years old at the time of his death. Following Terah's death, the Lord came and spoke with Abram, saying, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be blessed. I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram, in the faith of God, departed from Haran with his wife Sarai and all the people and possessions that he had acquired while in Haran. His nephew Lot also followed with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran to the land of the Canaanites. At this time, our father Noah had already succumbed to his old age. Noah lived 350 years after the flood and died at the age of 950, about the year 4120 BC. The Lord came again to Abram when he had reached the land of Canaan, saying, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. During the following years, Abraham, along with his nephew Lot, traversed the lands between Canaan and Egypt several times, accumulating much wealth, livestock, and followers. In fact, they both grew so great in wealth that Abraham and his nephew Lot's herdsmen were in constant strife over lands and territories. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan that was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot took all his livestock with his herdsmen and their possession and headed for the plains of the Jordan. The Lord came to Abraham again, after Lot departed from him, to reassure him of his inheritance. He spoke to Abram, saying, Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever." Abram departed from that place and pitched his tent in Hebron. As time passed, Sarai was still barren and unable to give an heir to Abram, so Sarai gave to Abram her Egyptian servant and slave, Hagar, as a concubine, that she may bear Abram a son and heir. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. He loved his son, because in Ishmael Abram had an heir. However, Abram would soon come to find out that Ishmael, being the first and only son to be born of his loins, was not to be heir to all his possessions and lineage. Another was to be born to him by his wife, Sarai, in her old age. Ishmael grew strong in the tent of his mother Hagar. Nevertheless, strife and jealousy divided the tents of Sarai and Ishmael's mother Hagar. It was Sarai who gave her servant Hagar to her husband Abram, but once Hagar conceived in her womb, Sarai's countenance turned to one who had hate and contempt in her heart. Sarai became an evil taskmaster to her servant Hagar. We see this same theme replaying over and over again in the pages of the Old Testament. Our forefathers taking on multiple wives and not being able to fulfill the needs of each individual wife, causing strife between their spouses, concubines, and even their children. We either find a wife, such as Leah, Jacob's first wife, filled with insecurities and the feeling of being unloved, or one like Rachel, Jacob's second wife, who was the apple of her husband's eye and received all the love and attention of her husband. Let us not forget the children of these unstable polygamous unions. Our father Jacob married both Leah and Rachel, the daughters of Laban, his mother's brother. Each of his wives gave him their servants as concubines, and each bore him children. His sons and daughters dwelt in 4 separate tents, basically detached from one another's household. We will see in the following chapter that the children of Jacob, who were reared in separate tents, held much contempt toward one another. I myself neither am an advocate for polygamy, nor am I an advocate against such unions. My father married 4 women in his lifetime, and 3 of his 4 wives bore him children. My mother also remarried and had a son. I have 2 brothers who were born to my father's second wife, and a sister who was born to my father's 4th wife. I also have a stepsister, who is the daughter of my father's 4th wife from a previous marriage. I am the oldest of my siblings from my father's first wife. Both my sister Maria and I share the same mother and had grown up in the same household as my brother Carl. So, my own life experience of growing up in a similar type of polygamous lifestyle helps me understand the plight and the consequences of these multiple unions. The son of promise. When Abraham was at the age of 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him, saying, "I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless." The Lord also said to Abraham, "No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, Sarah, shall be her name. I will bless her, and she shall be the mother of many nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old, and shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" After hearing the Lord's proclamation concerning Sarah's conception, Abraham petitioned the Lord on behalf of his son, Ishmael, and the Lord answered him, "No, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. And concerning Ishmael, the Lord said that he would bless him and make him fruitful, and multiply him exceedingly on the earth. As for Isaac, the Lord told Abraham that Sarah would give birth to him at a set time next year. The covenant established. Then the Lord commissioned Abraham to circumcise every male of his people in the foreskin of their penis. So Abraham went out and circumcised every male of his household, both free and slave. The Lord also commissioned Abraham as a sign of the covenant between him and his descendants to circumcise every male child when he turns 8 days of age. Genesis 17:12 states, "He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generation. He who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant." This covenant of circumcision is still practiced today by the Jewish people, who are direct descendants of Abraham in the flesh. It is an everlasting covenant that will be fulfilled on the 8th day of man, the second resurrection of the dead, as is recorded in Daniel 12:2. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. A time had come when the violence of Sodom and Gomorrah had reached into the heavens. The cities were filled with idolatries and sexual immoralities, such as homosexuality, bisexuality, lesbianism, pedophilia, bestiality, rape, and other creations of filth to satisfy the people's carnal desires. One day, while Abraham was sitting at the door of his tent, he saw 3 men standing near him and ran after them. He fell at their feet, knowing they were from God. Abraham asked them to stay and sit under the shade of a tree while he bathed their feet in water. Then he ran into the tent to have Sarah fix the angels of the Lord some morsels of bread and meat.
"I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son."
Sarah heard what the Lord had said to Abraham, and she laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?"
"Is anything too hard for the Lord?"
But Sarah, being afraid in the presence of the Lord, denied that she had laughed.
"No, but you did laugh."
The angels rose to their feet and looked towards Sodom, and the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing?" Then the Lord revealed to Abraham his intentions for Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord told Abraham that the outcry against both Sodom and Gomorrah was very great, and he and his angels had come down to pass judgment on these cities. Abraham, knowing that his nephew Lot and his people were dwelling in Sodom, began to contend with the Lord over the righteousness that may still be found in both Sodom and Gomorrah. As a result, the Father agreed that if just 5 righteous men were found in Sodom, that he would not totally destroy the city. Abraham's argument, however, was for naught, for as soon as the 2 angels entered the city of Sodom, they were met by a throng of men willing to take them by force to have them in a sexual manner. In an attempt to calm the madness and lust of the men of Sodom, Lot offered his 2 virgin daughters to the crowd, but they were refused. The men of Sodom lusted for the flesh of men, so the offering of the daughters was not a feasible exchange for the 2 angels in Lot's company. While Lot was still contending with the throng, the 2 angels struck the men of Sodom with blindness. Then the angels took Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hands and led them out of the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that they said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you or stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." But Lot's wife did not heed the instructions of the angels, and looked back over her shoulder upon the destruction, and she became a pillar of salt. The cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, were destroyed 391 years after the flood, about 2079 BC. The birth of Isaac, the son of promise. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. It was not long after Isaac's birth that Sarah turned her attention to Hagar, and Hagar's son Ishmael, saying to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, Isaac. Sarah's demand displeased Abraham because he loved his son Ishmael. Nonetheless, Abraham took heed to her words and cast Hagar and Ishmael from the face of Sarah. However, as the Lord promised Abraham, he made Ishmael a great nation. The death of Sarah. Sarah was 127 years old at the time of her death. She died in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. After her death, Abraham purchased a cave from the sons of Heth for 400 shekels of silver and buried Sarah in the cave. This would also become the tomb of Abraham and his children. At the time of Sarah's death, Abraham was about the age of 137, meaning Isaac was nearing 40 years of age. It was time to send his servant to the house of Nahor in Mesopotamia to find a suitable bride for Isaac among his relatives. When his servant came upon the land of Nahor, he met Rebekah, the granddaughter of Nahor, by a well of water. Once the servant introduced himself to be Abraham's trusted servant, Rebekah brought him to her father Bethuel and brother Laban. After hearing the words of Abraham's servant, Laban and Bethuel sent Rebekah with Abraham's servant to the land of Canaan to marry Isaac. Isaac took Rebekah for his wife, but Rebekah had trouble conceiving. For years, Isaac pleaded with the Lord regarding his wife's fertility problem, and after nearly 20 years of wedlock, Rebekah conceived twins in her womb. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, in Genesis 25, verses 22 to 23, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to Esau and Jacob. Jacob was born to the last generation of the second day of man, the 9th millennium. He was born 452 years after the flood of Noah, about the year 4018 BC. The death of Abraham, our father of faith. 15 years after the birth of the sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau, Abraham succumbed to his old age and died at the age of 175 years old. This would have been about the year 4003 BC, right on the cusp of a new millennium. Both Isaac and Ishmael buried their father Abraham in the cave of Machpelah, alongside his wife Sarah. We end this second millennium of man with the birth of Jacob, who would also be called Israel, and the death of our most beloved father, Abraham. Abraham is respectfully referred to as the father of faith. He was a man whom was loved by God and revered by all his contemporaries. Abraham walked in perfect faith in the sight of God, and his obedience and perseverance has been a reward to all who have decided to walk in his same footsteps. Amen. From the time Adam was cast from the Garden of Eden until the birth of Jacob, Abraham's grandson, who was born to the 21st generation from Adam, is a 2,000-year period. I refer to it as the reign of the fathers. Many of my contemporaries separate and divide these timelines and events into dispensational periods. Dispensationalism was derived by scholars and theologians in the 18th century to try and bring some divine order to the recorded timelines of biblical records. However, I believe that dispensationalism has left us Christians scratching our heads. On the other hand, I believe that categorizing these biblical timelines and events under the reigning times of our forefathers is much more practical and beneficial to my students. For example, let us begin to review the first week of creation. The first 6 days of creation, recorded in Genesis chapter 1, covers the first 6,000 years of the Lord's calendar of creation. The last and 7th day of the first week of creation is called the Sabbath. On this day, the Lord rested. Genesis 2 verses 1 through 3. On the 8th day of creation, which is the first day of the second week, Adam was cast from the garden. For 930 years, time was kept by Adam's age, from the time he was cast from the garden until his death at the age of 930 years old. Then, for another 950 years, time was recorded in accordance with Noah's age until his death, 350 years after the flood. However, at the time of Noah's death, man's lifespan began to decrease at a very rapid rate. Abraham died at the good old age of 175. Isaac lived to the age of 180 years, and Jacob was 147 years old at the time of his death. By the time of Moses, about the 15th century BC, man's life expectancy was about 70 years. This is mentioned in the prayer of Moses, recorded in Psalm 90, verse 10. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, why such a drastic decrease in man's lifespan? In the time of Noah, before the flood, the Lord decreed that man, because he is flesh, shall not strive with him forever. Yet his days shall be 120 years. Genesis chapter 6, verse 3. Thus, from the time of Noah's death, the year 2120 BC, time was kept by the passing of generations, not the generations born to men, but by the passing generations of time. Each generation of time regarding the biblical record spans a 40-year period. We see a reference to this 40-year generation in Psalm 95, verses 10 through 11. For 40 years I was grieved with that generation, and said, "It is a people who go astray in their hearts, and they do not know my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." Here the Lord is speaking of his children Israel, who he just had taken out of bondage in Egypt. Because of disbelief and disobedience, the Lord had that generation, who walked out of Egypt, wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that entire generation, except Joshua and Caleb, had passed away. Episode 4. The 12 Patriarchs of Israel.